Under normal circumstances, I'd probably face the firing squad for sharing this. But I'm betting Uncle Sam's got bigger problems right about now. They woke me after midnight. 2 Marines said I had to go with them and weren't in the mood for questions. I rode in the back of a black Jack with tinted windows to a nearby airstrip, where they shoved me into a military helicopter for a 2-hour flight across the desert. The pilot set us down outside a military convoy. This curved wall of utility vehicles and personnel carriers. Beyond it, soldiers hammered together scaffolding and packed up camo tarps, establishing a clandestine sort of base. Quickly, I got shoved inside. Metal shipping containers and foldable tables lay scattered around. There were 2 other individuals inside. Both of them looked like they'd very recently got dragged out of bed. One was a lady with a blunt ponytail and sharp cheekbones, who I guessed to be in their mid-30s. The other was a man with a wild grey beard and half-rimmed glasses. A real Colonel Sanders type. Before I could ask what was going on, a uniformed man with colorful medals pinned to his jacket appeared and gave us an indication as to what this was all about. The US government needed our help. 3 scientists, 3 respective leaders in their field, or at least the 3 who lived closest. The uniformed man said before he went any further, each of us needed to sign an NDA. He said the information was highly confidential and would face jail time over any leaks. Then, he slammed the form on the table and held out a pen. After exchanging a look, me and Ponytail signed without comment. Greybeard held out for a minute or 2, muttering how outraged he was at getting dragged all this way without warning, before eventually relenting. The moment that pen hit the desk, a female soldier began taking our measurements, while the general shut off the lights, walked over to a side table at the back of the room, and flicked on an old-school projector. There was a little clicker he used to cycle through photos. It started with satellite imagery detecting what he called anomalies astronomers began tracking weeks earlier, before moving on to a security footage of a white streak piercing the night sky above a series of sand dunes. Then, finally a video of teenagers riding around in the back of a pickup truck. Past one of the boys' left shoulder, there was a blinding flash of white light. A few seconds later, this giant, tidal wave of sand rolled toward them. The footage became all garbled after that. After the lights came up, the officer explained he needed help investigating a crater several miles east of our current location. The military already deployed a scouting party, which couldn't explain what they had encountered. All 3 of us stood there, in stunned silence, while outside, engines revved and helicopters took flight. Metallic clanks and thuds added to the uproar. The general explained we'd be going in with some real firepower, a full squadron of Marines. Then, he sat behind his makeshift desk, did the finger steeple thing and said, "What's it gonna be?" Greybeard asked for more details, clarification on several points. The general just stared at us over his hands and said, "Yes or no?" Ponytail agreed immediately, followed closely by me. It took a few seconds for Greybeard to add a frustrated, "Fine." Beyond that room lay changing facilities, divided into segments by roll-down tarps. At the far end, 2 soldiers guarded the exit, rifles strapped across their chests. The lady who took our measurements ushered us into different compartments where hazcam suits had been draped over metal hangers. She told us to get changed. Fast. Walking around inside the suit took some getting used to. Beside it lay a pack containing all the equipment I'd need. Prongs, jars, swabs. At the far side of the facility, me and the other scientists met up, and then stood around, our helmets under our arms. Greybeard kept saying, "I must be nuts," with a shake of his head. Finally, a Marine, also kitted out in a protective suit, stepped through the entrance and explained how things would shake out. Those helmets came fitted with lights, cameras, and a radio we could communicate by. A personnel would drive us and 6 SEALs out to the crater, where they had prepared a pulley system which we could rappel down by simply walking backwards. From there, it was a short trek to the objective. So what I'm saying is, no hassle. Got it? We haven't had time to stand around babying anybody through a panic attack. You follow my instructions at all times. I tell you to move, you move. I say stop, you stop. He asked each of us in turn if we understood. We all said yes. For the next 15 minutes, everyone rocked and bounced and rattled around in the back of a carrier, a dust storm trailing behind the rear wheels. The first pang of fear didn't hit until the vehicle ground to a halt. At which point, I deeply regretted signing up for this. I felt like Alice stumbling into Wonderland. The Marines told us to strap on our helmets, and then we all climbed out together. Cables had been hitched around the grille of a Humvee parked 10 meters before the mouth of a crater larger than a Texan football stadium. One by one, the first 3 Marines clipped on and backstepped into the gloomy chasm, while the rest hooked the scientists' belts onto the cord. By now, Greybeard had reached a state of complete panic. All he needed to do was reverse into the crater. But 10 minutes later, we were still watching him give himself a pep talk, like a child terrified of plunging off the top diving board. I didn't really blame him. The commander, who had already climbed into the hole, radioed over and over, checking the reason for the delay, becoming steadily more agitated each time. It took 20 minutes of coercion before Greybeard finally mustered up the courage and went, losing his footing several times before the darkness even had a chance to swallow him up. Ponytail eased herself down without protest. Then, I went. My boots locked their grip every 20 steps or so. Each time, my sides scraped roughly against the rock wall, sending rubble cascading into the unseen pit. Over the radio, the commander's voice said, "Nice and steady." It felt like lowering myself into a hungry mouth. I kept waiting for the stars overhead to disappear as the caravan sealed itself shut. At some point, my eyes closed, and they refused to open again until my boots touched a horizontal surface. A Marine unhitched my belt, and then I waited with the others, Marines on either side of us. After the final troops rappelled down, everybody got themselves armed and ready, and then the leader said, "Let's go." We marched into darkness, guided only by the torches strapped onto the helmets and rifles. 2 Marines kept to our front, 2 on each side, and 2 brought up the rear. The tunnel sloped down at a 30-degree angle. For a long time, we marched in a straight line over hard rock. But after that, we trudged around puddles of sticky ooze, scattered here and there. There were green lights up ahead. As they grew larger, the tunnel opened into a large hollow, roughly the size of an Olympic swimming pool. The ceiling was uneven height, but its tallest point stretched at least 100 feet from the ground. Toward the far side, there were the beginnings of a sizzling meteor, half buried in the wall. Its intense heat radiated through my face mask. The area blazed with light sticks, spaced out 20 meters or so around the outer edge. A few steps into the space, the Marines spread apart, coordinating by a series of complex hand gestures. We slowed as we approached the center of the cavern, navigating sticky patches of ooze along the way. Then, the commander signaled a halt, and the troop split into 2 columns. "Remember," he said. "Listen for my instructions." At the commander's gesture, the rifle lights trained on one point. And then, we finally got a sense of what they'd brought us out here to investigate. Picture the images of the life you see under a microscope. A brown grub, blown up to the size of a camper van and deeply wrinkled with no discernible features to speak of, except a facial tube containing a hole the size of a dinner plate on the end. The black pupil probed the ground as the creature marched around on claws at the end of 6 swollen maggoty appendages, uninterested in us visitors. I stood there with my jaw propped open as a shrill yelp came over the radio. Behind me, Greybeard fell into the dirt and scrambled away on his hands and knees. The closest Marines hooked him by the armpits, hauled him up and held him in place. I spun back toward the creature, my foot rooted on the spot. Giddy with excitement, Ponytail took a step closer.
Incredible. What is it? That's what you're here to tell us.
The commander replied.
All we know is, it arrived on the meteor.
She grabbed a little metal rectangle off her waist and waved it in arcs, her free hand tuning dials along the side.
What can you tell us about it? Has it just been wandering around?
My knees began to wobble, although I wasn't nearly as bad as Greybeard, whose labored breaths blasted over the radio.
Is this the only one?
Ponytail asked the commander.
It is.
After another glance at her device, she said,
I'm detecting low levels of radiation, but nothing lethal. The debris from the asteroid appears to be nickel iron, but I'll have to collect some samples and run some tests to be sure.
2 Marines stepped toward her as she approached the creature from behind, her counter chirping away. The commander, meanwhile, waved a hand that wasn't wrapped around his rifle in my direction. It was a full minute before I realized he was signaling for my attention. I'd become so caught in the daze, I forgot why they brought us along in the first place. My hands shook so badly that I only got the pipette out of my pack on the 3rd attempt. With my light trained on the floor, I bent down low so I could transfer samples of the slime into the little plastic containers. I coughed directly before a puddle of sludge. Another pool lay a few meters ahead, several others spaced all around me. I took a moment to collect myself and glanced around. At the far side of the cavern, green lights blinked out of existence as though something walked across the path, blotting them from view. For a few seconds, I could only see those areas by the surrounding ambience. Just then, a fat glob of mucus dripped onto the center of the puddle by my feet. For a moment, a tiny slither of steam rose from that spot. I craned my top half back so I could look straight up in the constrictive suit. And as I did, chills raced along my spine.
We have to get the fuck out of here!
I shouted over the radio, racing back to the group. Several lights whipped toward me. I pointed straight up. The rifles illuminated the roof alive with movement. There was something up there. Or rather, many somethings. Whatever point the Marines trained on squirmed and wriggled, glistening trails of falling mucus plummeting past the beams of light. Everybody fell silent, except for Greybeard, who continued hyperventilating. The writhing sound swelled, and then the Marines' rifles waving around in white arcs. Now, silhouetted blobs were approaching us from every direction.
Fall back! Fall back!
The commander screamed. We dashed toward the tunnel, but within seconds got cut off by another creature. After the commander's signal stop, a frantic Greybeard elbowed free from the closest troopers and continued his mad scramble for the tunnel. The man he'd shaken off raced after him. There was a clamor of movement, and then everybody gasped, halting suddenly. Because now, Greybeard's light uncovered another alien. He toppled backwards onto the ground, his torch illuminating the creature from below like a personal spotlight.
You told us there was only one.
Ponytail said to the commander.
There
The creature shuffled toward Greybeard, who tried scrambling back to his feet, but moved far too slowly. The gaping hole in the organism's face expanded to the size of a car tire and shot out on the end of a long tube as though spring-loaded, swallowing the top half of Greybeard's helmet, which began to melt. Whatever trails of mucus seeped from the hole melted the suit and into Greybeard's skin, which sizzled and boiled as though dipped in hot oil. The tube reeled back like a fishing line, convulsing, flexing, devouring more and more of the scientist and his protective suit, neck, shoulders, chest. Once it reached the halfway point, a pair of flailing legs, covered in boils and blisters, exposed muscle from where the material had been completely eaten away and lifted into the air, screams still blasting across the radio. The lifeform swallowed our colleague the way anacondas swallow antelopes, one terrible inch at a time. When only a pair of limp, melted boots poked through the cavity, the screaming stopped, and then Greybeard was gone. Devoured. Weapons pointed. Several troopers spread out and formed a little semicircle. At the commander's signal, the rifles unloaded, and as those rounds lit up the dark and echoed off rock walls, I dropped flat onto my stomach, hands over the back of my helmet. A hush fell over the cave. After a few seconds, I felt brave enough to look up. There wasn't a scratch on the creature, which had begun whipping from side to side like a duck shaking itself dry after a paddle around the lake. A tear opened up along the middle, like it was getting ripped apart, accompanied by a sticky thorp. Trails of steaming mucus linked the two halves together. Only when both sides swelled up and acted independently did it become clear it wasn't tearing. It was splitting. Now, there were 2 pupils and 12 legs. The creature had undergone a process of division, of replication. Slime trails dripped onto the floor, forming more puddles as the twins wriggled free from one another. I stood there, horrified, my feet bolted onto the spot. Before this process finished, a gun fired somewhere behind us, and then everybody whipped around. The first creature had begun enveloping a marine, who, unable to see because his head had disappeared inside another tube, unleashed a spray of bullets. There were trails of steam billowing from around his dissolving waist.
Fall back! Fall back!
The commander shouted, and then an arm wrapped around my waist and dragged me away. We gave the twin creatures a generous berth as we circled them back toward the tunnel. But on the far side, I saw more glow sticks vanish and let out a giant yelp. Lumbering silhouettes surrounded us on all sides, each drawing closer. The aliens had been busy. A gloved hand pressed hard against my back, and then we zigzagged in every direction, our torches momentarily throwing light onto a series of expanding pupils, which shot out in a manner that made me picturing spearfishing. I never glimpsed one of the lifeforms for more than 3 seconds, thankfully. Nobody could get out of there as fast as they wanted because we kept having to sidestep sludge pools. Neither me nor Ponytail said a single word during the mad scramble back to the entrance, where our escorts bounced on their heels as they hooked everybody onto the cable and then yelled into the radio.
Bring us up! Bring us up!
As I got reeled into the air, my light whipped around the cavern walls, periodically landing on creatures climbing their way toward the entrance. Outside the crater, reinforcements had already started arriving. Ponytail and I got ushered past the soldiers and inside the original carrier, while behind us, more aliens than I could count escaped the pit and probed around. On the drive back, armored helicopters and vehicles with turrets mounted on the cargo beds sped past. Over the nearest Marine's radio, I heard the words,
"Perimeter breached! Perimeter breached!"
Ponytail and I exchanged a concerned look at that. The carrier ground to a halt at the base, where they ushered us inside the facilities and sterilized our suits. Soldiers darted back and forth in a frenzy of activity, their radios spewing static and coded chatter. The general appeared, and asked us to evaluate what we'd seen. Although, he didn't appear pleased with the report. He simply nodded and then told us a chopper would fly us to the edge of the desert, where there'd be chauffeurs waiting to drive us home. I just looked up the area where I estimated the crater to be. West of that position, there's reports of authorities rounding up residents and shipping them off. There's also photos of some serious firepower headed that way. I'm not exactly sure what we saw down there. All I know is I'm writing this at the airport, and my flight is about to begin boarding. Merry Christmas, I guess.